Next, I would like to invite our panelists for our next panel discussion of the day, which is securing development financing through an ESG lens. So, Ambassador Karl, please come to the stage. Mr. Calvin Vuong of Vietnam Investment of the Climate Fund Managers. Ms. Shilpa Krishnan, Senior Manager of Infraco Asia. And Dr. Dingming Dao, Chair of CA Water. Please come to the stage. Thank you. Craig, I will hand it off to you.
So in order to access large-scale development capital for lending and investment, companies must link their business plans to impact objectives. Increasingly, these are found hidden in bilateral or multilateral free trade agreements for climate, gender empowerment, and improved governance. And development finance typically has lots of requirements and restrictions linked into ESG. So what does this mean for companies in Vietnam looking to finance expansion of their products and services? The panelists this morning will share their perspectives and visions of the opportunities for impact and the challenges faced in Vietnam. So we're very pleased and privileged to have a wonderful panel this morning. On my far right, we have His Excellency Karl van der Bossche, the Ambassador of the Kingdom of Belgium to Vietnam. We have Calvin Vuong, Investment Director at Climate Fund Managers, who's a climate fund professional with an aspiration to help create a world that is more resilient to climate change for the next generation, which I just spoke about, the next generation. On my immediate right here, we have Dr. Dao Din, Chair of CA Water. CA Water is currently the investor of many projects on exploiting, treating, and supplying clean water throughout Vietnam, and is committed to ensuring sustainable, friendly development in harmony with the natural environment. And then for our diversification and our balance, we're delighted to have Shilpa Krishnan, a Senior Manager, Investment Management from Infraco, which is part of PIDG, or PIDG, which we heard referenced earlier this morning. Shilpa is an investment specialist in the Asian infrastructure and clean energy space. At Infraco Asia, she drives project development and management activities with their partners. So to kick us off, I'll ask Ambassador, His Excellency, Ambassador, it's been a few years now since the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement was finalized, and we're all very excited when it happened. How has trade developed as a result of that between the EU and Vietnam? Has it been a win-win for both sides, or perhaps too early to tell? And what aspects of ESG are covered by the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement?
Thank you. Good morning, Craig, and good morning, everybody. Very happy to be here, and we will be talking about the EU dimensions. But I can tell that Belgium is the sixth largest partner within the EU with Vietnam, and we are looking very much forward to boosting the trade with Vietnam through that free trade agreement. It is true that the trade agreement has been agreed a few years ago. Too close to call yet, according to the Commission. I'm not really agreeing with that, because when I look at the numbers, I see clear directions. The direction is up. The only way is up. In percentages, it's really soaring. It's like 34% more imports in the EU, 19% more exports to Vietnam. We're talking in 2022 about 64 billion euros. But a trade deficit for the European Union of 38 billion. So, to me, this is a clear indication. But there was a clear choice also to have that agreement with Vietnam. It's one of the few countries in this region that we have an agreement with because of the potential of Vietnam, because of the geopolitical importance of the country. So we really wanted to have this agreement. So we do take the loss for now. It's not a loss, it's an investment. That's how we look at it. ESG in the free trade agreement. We have trade and sustainable development chapters in these agreements. Why do we have that? We have moved from the traditional commercial agreements a long time ago, how much percentage in market access, how much this, how much that. We have moved into a much more subtle kind of free trade agreements because our population is also asking for it. This is also, ladies and gentlemen, about creating fair chances for companies, but also for populations. This is about respect for the Paris agreements, for climate change. This is about decent work. This is about gender equality. So that's a whole new area, what we have been exploring. So we integrate in this free trade agreement a trade and sustainable development chapter through which we are trying to work together with the Vietnamese side on these issues, sustainable fisheries, forestry, for example, but indeed also the ILO conventions on decent work. Vietnam has been doing a lot already in this. So when I was talking about the billions at the beginning, that's only one side of the story. You also see that Vietnam is acquiring the ILO conventions. They are going into the ratification of it. They have a tough nut to crack with the very last one, number 87 on the freedom of association. But we are in continuous dialogue with the Vietnamese on this. Why do we want this? I think it's important to understand that the EU is not just creating barriers to market access. We really are going, thanks also to the Green Deal, we are going to net emission by 2050, and we are very convinced that this is the only way to go. But we don't want our markets to be flooded with products that are not corresponding to these norms of high production, of decent work, products that would not respect deforestation. So this is about level playing field as well.
Great. And forgive me, I've never been to Belgium. I'm sure most people have, but I haven't. But is there a Belgian way when you look at Belgium and the European Union and their role more broadly, investing in Vietnam, clean growth agreements and investment?
A Belgian way.
Yeah.
I like that. You have never been to Brussels?
No, never. Sorry,
Belgium?
apologies. Yeah.
Okay. We should have a beer after this.
I'm happy about that. That was easy, wasn't it? An easy chance to get a beer.
A Belgian way, yes, of course. Well, we're a small country, but we're quite powerful we're a very open country, so we depend on exports. And so we are always working together with other partners to see how we can find solutions. We're not imposing, we're working together. We're finding solutions together by respecting the other one as well. Now, specifically for ESG, I can tell that we have several instruments, so we work within the European Union, fair enough. But we also work with our own financial instruments for Vietnam, but also for other countries. One of them is called FinExpo, so it's concessional loans or even commercial interventions, but always with a view to invest in a country with governmental actors, taking into account human rights dimension, gender, development, that kind of stuff. We have a little bit like the Australian colleagues and friends. We have an investment company, Bio, that will go into direct or indirect investments. We have Belgium, who is present here in the room, and who is pushing also the agenda of ESG, of decent work. So we're a small chamber of commerce, but we really believe in this agenda of ESG, because companies can invest here, but ultimately they also want to export to the European Union. So you will have to acquire the taste of it.
Well, that's great. It's good to hear that quiet diplomacy certainly exists in the EU, which is great. Also, Belgium sounds as if it's a small country, punches above its weight, and has great beer. So what's not to like? We'll come back to you in a minute, Ambassador. Perhaps if I move to Kelvin. Kelvin, can you tell us just what makes Vietnam attractive to you and your firm? What are the key growth areas, and what are the challenges that you face?
So I think there's a few factors, of course. There's no single dominating factor. But the fact that Vietnamese governments have an agenda for net zero and has embarked on a long-term sustainability plan, which has been evidenced via several long-term planning issued by the central governments. So, first of all, it's a country that want to go toward that directions. And secondly, with the economic growth, I think like you mentioned, the GDP per capita just crossed the 3,000 mark. And if the trend grow, it could double in 5 to 7 years. So this is where we see that at this stage of the growth of the country, the impact that we can achieve now will be able to be double or triple with that economic growth as well. So that's the second factor. There's other factors as well, but that is probably the most important factor when we're looking at a country for investments.
Okay. And you look at partnerships in Vietnam, and you represent foreign capital and development capital as well. So with your ESG standards, when you bring those to your Vietnamese projects and partners and contractors, is that easy or difficult, or can you share some of your experiences?
I probably would say that none of the audience here could or would classify that as easy, probably in any countries at all. So probably just 1 minute on the standard that we're operating on. So Climate Fund Manager is a fund manager based out of the Hague in the Netherlands, and actually half owned by the Dutch Development Bank FMO. We operate 2 funds at the moment, one on energy and one on climate adaptations. Climate adaptation is water infrastructure, etc. And both are strongly supported by the Dutch government via various agencies. So we recognize, before the fund is set up, I think we recognize that bringing capital together with all of this condition attached. And condition here is good conditions. We operate following IFC performance standard, and it's definitely not easy. So we ask ourselves a question, then how we do it if it's not easy? And I think the approach that we have embarked on, not only in Vietnam, but every country, is a localized approach where we have a local team on the ground, understanding the culture of the country, the practice of the country for decades already, but then understand the issue from an international perspective and try to build that bridge. Not only from a knowledge perspective, but from, I mean, everything we do in life at the end come down to a human touch as well. So having a local presence, we'll be able to continuously develop the trust with the local partner, and then help them to understand what we're trying to do is not just bring arbitrary conditions to the investment, but actually this practical, pragmatic approach to something that is important for long-term sustainability of the business and of the investments.
Great. Well, we're very fortunate today. We have one of your investment partners here, actually, Dr. Dao Din. Dao, you have been involved in sustainability longer than most people in this room, for at least 10 years. Can you share any quick case study about the journey and the changes you've seen over those 10 years?
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for asking the company. CA Water, actually, 10 years in the water business is a very young company, not a water experienced company. We are starting from very small project when we're talking about few thousand cubic per day supply for in the commune size. And now we are rolling out for the whole country with about 10 different provinces from the north to the south of Vietnam. And we are challenged with all type of raw water. In the north is surface water, the very good water, low turbidity is low. But they have other things like hardness water. But in the south, water is plenty of water, but they have the salinity issue. So I'm facing with all of the type of different sort of water. And the important thing is we have to look for the technology to treat that type of water. And also have technology, we need to talking about the fund. Because Vietnam traditional is using sand filter, conventional way is very simple. Put all in is a chemical in for settling the water. And this is very dangerous to the health. And we are state of art in using the ultrafiltration membrane for all of my municipal water, which is in the rural area. So I'm proud that I'm bringing to Vietnam now. In some rural area, they have the very good quality of water, like the city.
And now some people think, I used to have a colleague that thought this, that water falls from the skies and is therefore free. How can you make a financial return in this sector?
Yeah, that is very good question. We think that you are right. If 20 years, 30 years ago, I remember when I was young, I go to the Saigon River and I see in the bottom of the water, and everyone can use the water without any treatment. And now I think even your rainwater you also cannot use because it's already polluted. And all of the water now is have the significant investment for the treat the water. And luckily that Vietnam leader, they see the problem and they already invest a lot for the big city in the water treatment. And municipal water in the rural area still lacking a big demand for the water. I come to some area, the people, they pay about $10 for 1 cubic they carry by the truck, by the tank. So that is an important need for the rural area. And of course, if we invest several $1 million to do some certain area, we need to think about how to return, because I am not a billionaire like Bill Gates. So important thing, if we approach the local bank, they also cannot give the loan, because most of this is a very long IR return of investment. It takes a long time, 10 years or more than 10 years. And all of the network is underground. So they didn't see the access of the company. So they not agree to provide a loan or very small part of the investment. So when I approached all of the fund, I also work corporate with many of the water engineers. They also invest, but they are not looking in the same way. They are talking in the short term, and they make a margin in the EPC, and they are not the same vision with me. When I look for some fund, and I found with CFM is they are share with me the same version, and I have the funding to support to invest all of the project. Of course, when we invest, we have the mechanism to collect the money, return, and of course now with the frame law of Vietnam, they quite protective and they quite transparent to control the quality of water. The tariff also approved by the government. So every people, they're happy to pay very small amount. I already study about maximum 2% of their income for their water use. And everyone happy for that. So we can we can return the investment.
Okay, well, thank you. So you've worked with international DFIs. Shorpa, you represent a group of capital from overseas with Infraco. Do you compete with the private sector? Are you the private sector? How do you fit into it?
Okay, I think that's a good question. So I'll just probably step back and give our audience here a bit of overview of what Infraco Asia is all about. So we are part of the Private Infrastructure Development Group, which is PIDG for short. So PIDG is headquartered in the UK, and PIDG is donor funded by different donor governments and by IFC. And PIDG is essentially a blended finance vehicle. And PIDG has different companies within its group, including Infraco Asia, which has an Asia mandate, Infraco Africa, Guarantco, and so on. So I represent Infraco Asia, and we have a unique mandate. We invest in very early stage development projects in Asia, and by reason of our mandate, we are able to take slightly above average risk compared to the market. And we are able to pull in resources from PIDG, including technical assistance and viability gap funding, which is basically grant money. And essentially the mandate of Infraco Asia and PIDG is to invest limited amounts of public funds and mobilize private capital. So to address your question on whether we compete with the private sector, the short answer is no, but here's why we don't. We aim to create, what we call additionality. So our investments are essentially additional, and therefore we ensure that we don't compete or crowd out the private sector. Rather, we crowd them in. So, and when we talk about additionality, we essentially say that we invest X amount of money, and our project partner and probably local commercial banks invest a multiple of that. So and that is an essential filtering criterion for us. We invest only in projects where we are able to demonstrate additionality and where we are able to crowd in the private sector. So one example of this is, one project in Vietnam that we had done many years ago, the Ninh Thuan solar project, where we were one of the early investors into the solar, into the solar energy market in Vietnam at a time when solar was not considered bankable. So we actually demonstrated bankability, we got the PPA, and we have subsequently exited the project. But essentially, this was considered to be market transformative because it was done at a time when such projects were not really as popular and prevalent as they are today. So that's how we demonstrate the crowding in and the additionality effect where we mobilize private capital.
Okay. Yeah. Well, moving to some quick fire questions for each of the panelists, and again to give the key takeaways for our participants today. The first question is, what are the key sectors that you think are most promising for institutional investors using an ESG type of lens? Ambassador, can I go to you first?
I think you should ask it to the companies.
All right. What are the ambassador things on that? Calvin?
I'm not running the economy.
Yeah,
we are enablers.
You're allowed to pass. Okay, Calvin.
So I think two sector mainly for us, and actually is our focus at the moment. Clean energy. Vietnam is in a power shortage at the moment, as we all know from the public news, and it happens during an economic downturn when industrial activity is down by 20 to 30%. So just imagine the power shortage if the economic activities is at the pre-economic downturn level. And so we already invested in Vietnam. Our clean energy asset in Vietnam is at the moment is about $400 million in operations, but we are looking to significantly increase that value over the next 3 to 5 years because of the energy needs of the country. The second sector, I think, is for our second fund is climate adaptation infrastructure. So we are talking about clean water supply. For example, we are in discussion with Ho Chi Minh City for the early flood warning systems or wastewater treatments, etc. So the amount of infrastructure spending needed for Vietnam to reach a sustainable development goal will be very significant as the number that you mentioned before. So definitely the opportunity is there.
Okay. Shilpa?
We have a range of sectors which are focus areas for us, and essentially we aim to create impact through our investments. So the sectors that you mentioned are pretty much of interest to us as well. So across Asia, we invest in energy, and we have several solar CNI rooftop projects across Asia. We also have small hydro projects in India and Indonesia. We have water supply projects in Vietnam and Cambodia. We have a cold storage project in Cambodia. So our strategic priority is really to invest in projects which are scalable, market transformative, provide affordable infrastructure, and are replicable. So if any sector or industry broadly falls within these categories, it's something that we would be open to investing in.
Great, okay. Now, Dr. Dow, you're going to say water, right? What sectors?
Could be said that if no one mentioned about water projects.
Okay. So water is a common theme, which is great, and clean energy is an important theme. I referenced the revised power plan, the PDP8, And we have more sections on that, but just perhaps initial quick thoughts. How important do you think that revised power plan might be for Vietnam? Ambassador?
Tremendous. And finally, we've been congratulating the Vietnamese government on producing this plan. We all know that it was a heavy birth. Took quite a while to adapt the plans after the commitments of the Prime Minister in Glasgow. They've been doing a good job. And it's a work in progress. It's not finished, and it will never be finished. But at least there is a direction now. There's a clear vision which enables, well, for our companies to take decisions and to take risks also, because that's what it is about, knowing that they are at least in the line of what the Vietnamese government wants to do. How this will work out in the next years, we will have to see, because it will change. New forms of energy will come, I would say, on board, but it will be offshore. So it is of a tremendous importance. And I think politically, for us, it was something that we really were expecting also from the Vietnamese government, because they have to put their money where their mouth is. You go to Glasgow, well then make it happen.
Kelvin. So the question was PDP-8. How important do you think it is?
I think it's extremely important in so many senses that it's just hard to describe them all. It impacts the long-term competitiveness of the country. So just want to give one specific example in a specific context. So I think the PDP-8 was signed on Monday or Tuesday, and the previous Friday, I was in a meeting with other renewable energy investors with Deputy Prime Minister Hồng Hà, and that was one example that he makes. So he held up his cup, water cup, ceramic on the table, and he said that this ceramic cup, in about 5 to 7 years, if it's exported to EU, for example, if it's made from a clean energy source, the price would be different. The final price would be different from one that made from traditional energy source. And that is basically why it's important in the long-term competitiveness of the country to embark on this plan. So that is just one aspect, but a very important aspect, why this is not just energy, but it's a long-term competitiveness of Vietnam, I think, as a whole.
Okay, thank you. Shilpa.
Yeah.
I think, I would agree that this is truly a landmark development. It did take time to finalize, but finally it did come through. What we like about this announcement is the fact that coal will be completely phased out by 2030, and that's truly a welcome development. There is a lot of plan for offshore wind and so on. And we do believe, and I agree with the ambassador, that the implementation of that will be key. From Infraco Asia's point of view, we look at it as a welcome development. We perhaps, given that there is a lot of private sector interest, it's probably not an area where we will be actively competing against the private sector because there is a lot of interest already. But nevertheless, these, it's a good announcement.
Thank you. I think our mics need to be a little bit closer for our friends at the back of the hall. Dr. Dao, PDP-8 is more about energy. Does it intersect with your world and water at all?
Actually, you are right. Not much involved with the water, except for the hydropower. So I'm actually in the water business. Everyone in that line, we have to pay for every cubit. They call it is a growing tree fee for every cubit we produce. Even it's about 50 dong per cubit, but we still pay for that. In other words, that we also contribute for the PID8 program.
Very good. Well, for all of us, we're on a journey about ESG, and not all of us have all the tools and the knowledge. Is there any training available for people or for companies that want to learn more about meeting the ESG criteria that the DFI's demand. Dao, do you want to talk about training or needs?
Yes, actually, when I met with CFM, actually this is not new to me because 15 years ago, I was in the Vietnam delegation when talking about UNDP, talking about SDG, Sustainable Goal Development, and water is sustainable number 6. And on that, lucky that I have all that information about the SDG. So when I'm talking about ESG now this is a new concept for Vietnam, and even for the new for the leader of Vietnam when they're talking about ESG and in the country point of view or even in the company corporate. So only that way we are working on with CFM to improve, understand about the ESG. All of my project now we are starting with the very basic thing like demand study, the social study, environment study, and very seriously all is follow the guideline by the international consultant. But one thing I want to share with you all here, everyone talking about ESG at the United Nations level. We are talking on the ground because I am on the ground. So very funny question when they're asking the people when they cleared the land 10 years ago, they passed away, don't know how to follow them, and they're still asking me the question after they receive the payment compensation, is it their life better or not? So we cannot answer because 10 years ago, this has never happened for Vietnam and particularly for my project. But luckily that to apply the ESG in Vietnam, we really need the ESG manager. Like CFM, they have very expert in ESG and they understand the local situation. And with the local country manager, he understands that is the gap, always have the gap between the international level and the local company.
Shilpa, you mentioned viability gap in terms of financing, but is there also a gap that you encounter in terms of ESG knowledge and awareness?
Yes, there is a considerable gap. We operate in different countries through our project partners, and our endeavor is to bring our project partners up to speed on ESG matters. In our initial filtering criteria, a lot of parameters, impact parameters are already considered. So projects that do not meet the impact parameters are already rejected or not considered for further investment. But even after we shortlist a project and we sign the investment agreements, there are several areas where we need to train our partners. One important aspect is HSES. We are very focused on...
What's HSES?
Sorry, health, safety, environment, and social. So it's and it's basically safety, safety-related criteria. And given that many of the projects that we operate are remote, and HSES is not topmost on the minds of some of our project partners, but we bring them up to speed because we are very focused on safety, and so that's one aspect where we constantly train our project partners to adopt the best standards as far as HSES is concerned. Another aspect of training that we frequently impart is GBVH. Sorry for the acronyms. It's gender-based violence and harassment. So, and that's something that we do need to sensitize our partners. So we believe not just in safeguarding women, but also empowering women. But GBVH is pretty much at the core of what we need to bring our partners up to speed to. So we do a lot of on-the-job training for our partners so that they meet the ESG criteria.
Great. So lots of acronyms for everyone to learn, and thankfully there's a lot of good content to help us on our growth mindset and our own learning journeys. So Calvin, Dr. Dao spoke very nice words about his partnership with you, but more generally, training, is that something that you bring in addition to capital in what you do?
Yes, definitely, and actually it's for every investment. And what we're looking for the most in the potential investment is basically the sponsor that is willing to embark on that. I mean, I myself haven't used the word training, but basically is an exchange of the informations and the investment criteria and requirement, and why. The important thing is, why is there such a requirement for investment? Why? In that local context. For example, in the land acquisition, why we have to do that? We have to take that steps. We have to do a baseline study to understand what is the social condition before an investment, so that we can measure the impact and measure the actual condition after the investment. So we can only do that because we have the baseline study. So something to that basic level and explain it in a local context. So yes, it's training, but then it's exchange of the idea and exchange of the concepts as well. And actually, I think it's two-way street. There's a lot of time that I learn from a local context that if we rigidly apply the conditions in the traditional way, it will not work. So I think it's two-way exchange of information, concept, and knowledge to find a point that the two parties can work with each other. Yeah.
Ambassador, I think Belgium invented beer, invented French fries as well. Training, is that something that you bring to Vietnam? As many
Belgian fries.
Belgian fries, sorry. Come on. Is training and human capital development something you do?
I want to come back on what Shilpa was saying, because the whole panel discussion was focusing a lot on the E of ESG. And so I'm very glad that we are moving a little bit in the S, but also in the G. Talk about acronyms. Because it's much more than just, okay, investing in clean tech, that's fine. But you have to invest in people. And indeed, they need training. And this is something that we will promote a lot. The gender awareness, for example. A study from McKinsey from a few years ago indicated that if women are truly participating in the Vietnamese economy, the economy would grow with 9%. So here's a gap, a big one. And so I would say, okay, there's not really a gender balance in this panel. I have 4 daughters, so I did my part in the gender balance. But it is extremely important. So awareness raising, that needs to be done. It's part of a culture in a company. The same for safety. When you were talking about safety, it reminds me that if we are investing in companies here in Vietnam, we also look at the number of accidents on the work floor. If that rate is too high, you risk losing your finance. So there is a lot that needs to come into play. And I would say all this is not just to harass you companies. This is to make better products that have a high image and that have a bigger potential of being sold in markets with high value. Because let's face it, most of the investments here in Vietnam are done to export to United States, Europe, wherever. So yes, training, absolutely.
In our last 8 minutes or so, a quick last round of questions to our panelists, and then if you have questions, do think of a question that you'd like to ask. But to the ambassador, what do you hope to achieve during your posting here in Vietnam, and what advice would you leave for the next ambassador?
I found an embassy in transition because the country is in transition. We were here financing traditional development projects and helping people, and that's fine, and it's still important because, okay, Vietnam is fully in transition. It's a lower middle income country, but at the same time there's a different world already looming at the horizon, and so you need to cope with that. So it's not longer a development cooperation approach, it's a business relation that you have to develop, but keeping those values of human rights, decent work, the gender balance I was talking about, no child labor. The European Union is also going into the deforestation directive, in the due diligence directive. All these things matter. And so, yes, we are working on equal foot with Vietnam, but we want to promote those values very much. And for my successor, it's a bit early. I still have 3 years, so. But based on my first experiences in Vietnam, have a good liver.
Right, we'll go to some, any questions from the audience? So if you, don't be shy. If you have a question, raise your hand. If not, I have 2 more questions here. We have a question there. Can you pass the microphone? And either direct it to the panel in general or specifically to...
Good morning, and thank you so much for the panel discussion. My name is Han from Impact, an ESG advisory firm. I have a question for the fund managers, and actually to echo your words, Mr. Martin, do more, measure more, report more. So in that context, with the companies that you invested in, do you face any challenges in terms of measurement of impacts and reporting of impacts, and what advice would you give to companies to improve on that? Thank you.
Kelvin.
So basically, yes, we have a very rigorous reporting framework. Yes, like the impact reporting is part of the overall reporting that we have on a monthly, quarterly, and annually basis to our management and to our investor, and is following the established international. So it's there. So my focus is on the second part of your question, what the company would do about it. I think is to change the mindset that those reporting requirements is not an additional work that you need to do, but actually it is something that gives you the competitive advantage in securing concessional funding or additional capital for your growth. So I think that change of mindset is the most important, because normally a company, when they don't realize the real benefit of it, it's just additional work, which is just, most of the time, just pushed to a department just to get it done, but not with the real. And when it's not being done in a proper way, the investment professional and ESG professional in the funds, when they look at it, they will know that it's not being done properly. So I think that mindset is very important.
Sure, but do you want
competitive.
to add anything? Thanks, Kelvin.
Sure. In case of Infraco Asia, measurement and reporting is very important as well. So for us, when we evaluate an investment at the opportunity stage, we measure impact in terms of the impact on people, planet, economy, and markets. But this is not just a slogan. We have managed to develop a quantitative model for measuring the potential impact of a project on each of these. And as we go along, we continuously measure the impact. So people, it's like how many people do we impact? What's the depth of the impact and who? For example, do we impact the disadvantaged sections more? Then in those situations, the project gets a better score. Planet, hardly needs any explanation, but the fact that a lot of the countries that we invest in Asia, in frontier markets, account for the least per capita GHG emission, but they are disproportionately impacted by climate change. So we do measure the impact on planet, and we support projects that contribute to climate resilience, adaptation, and so on. We also measure impact in terms of the impact on the economy, like jobs created, or the efficiency improvement that we are able to bring about, as well as we talk about the transformative impact of a project. So there are various parameters we use in reporting, and I'm glad that our project partners are completely in sync with us, because that is essentially what we stand for. And we do get regular timely reports from our partners.
Now, just if perhaps you can add into that from a startup perspective, how easy or challenging is it to meet the reporting requirements under the ESG frameworks?
I think that two gentlemen and lady already mentioned about the mindset is very important. What I insist on that in the local partner, from the top to even from the staff, they have to very understand about the necessity of the ESG compliance, and they have to apply this in the real world, in the real project in this area. as I said that there's still a gap on that in theory and the practical. So the important thing, the leader like me in the company have to set it as a priority in understand ESG and applicable in ESG in the project and in the company.
Very good. Any other question? Question at the back. It looks like John Ditty.
It does, Craig. Thank you. John Ditty from KPMG. My sense is that the investor community, both domestic and international, is very supportive of what Vietnamese corporates are doing, and we are making progress. I guess my question is, at what point do we recognise that the progress is not fast enough? Because even though we are changing and we're getting better at incorporating sustainability considerations, realistically we are still falling behind other countries, other economies, other corporates. At what point, and this is a general question, do we need to push harder for faster change than we're seeing at the moment?
Thank you, John. Ambassador, is that a hot potato or?
Very hot, but we like fries, so let's tackle it. But I hope that the other panelists will also chip in. It's an extreme good question, and it's a challenge in the EU, in our relations with Vietnam. We are trying to monitor, indeed, the progress on the implementation of all the commitments that were taken in the free trade agreement through the domestic advisory group. That domestic advisory group is composed of governmental representatives, but mostly of civil society. At least that's the aim. Why? Because we want to have a broad representation of Vietnam that can report back about the progress that is made here in the country on those commitments in the free trade agreement. It's clear that it is a tough job. I'm not shying away from saying that. But there is no alternative either. So we continue to talk with our Vietnamese friends. It is a slow progress, but there is progress. And sometimes, okay, you've not been to Belgium, you have not been to Luxembourg either, but there's something called the procession of Echternach. You go 3 steps ahead, 2 steps back. And that's where we are. That's how I feel that this whole relationship with Vietnam is. But there is progress. But it is very, very tough. And progress on, well, the implementation of these criteria, it's very easy to measure at the border. Because at one stage, the European Union will require proof of abiding with the deforestation directive, with the due diligence directive. And if you can't prove it, well, no market access. That's how simple it will be.
Well, I think Ambassador did a very good job handling that hot potato. We don't need the panel to chip in to make Belgian fries. You did a great job on your own. I think the Dutch also had this statement of 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. Well, with that, we'd like to conclude the panel this morning. Thank you for the questions. If you haven't had a chance to ask your questions, then do send them into the forum, and I'm sure someone will give you a reply. But I'd like to thank Ambassador for your time this morning, and Kelvin, and Shilpa, and Dr. Dow. Thank you very much, and thank you all very much, and enjoy the rest of the sessions today.